Yeah, and then so anyway, so I was doing drugs, and that's how I coped. That's how I coped with PTSD. And like I knew it in a way, like subconsciously I had something that wasn't weird or whatever. But so I just started using drugs, and dude, that just went on and on for years. And it just got progressively worse. And like I was just using drugs to totally to not. Just to suppress, my feelings and PTSD and all these issues and all this crap. So I did that for years. I did that for years and years. And I was in Seattle for a couple years, and I was in Portland, Oregon a couple years using major marijuana every day, totally sedated every day. And then I came back to Salt Lake City. Back to Salt Lake City, lived with my mother, and I was still way into drugs, drinking heavily, trying to go about life normal in a normal way or whatever, but I was just I was just faking it, it was a total sham. I was a total drug addict and then trying to pretend I was normal person. Anyway, so drinking all the time, going to school, living on the GI Bill, just wasting VA money all the time. I feel bad about it, but I was living on disability and just spending all my money on drugs and everything. And anyway, so then that went on for a couple years. Then third year I was using marijuana heavily every day, living around some apartments around here, and just constant turmoil, constantly feeling out of place and all this stuff, avoiding reality or whatever. And then so then my dad died, and my stepdad, and I had this stepdad that I was got to know and lived with a couple years. He was my real biological father. Anyways, he passed away, and after that, I totally basically had a breakdown after that. And then I guess and so then I had a total breakdown. And then so the VA gave me this disability, and so they gave me a bunch of back pay. And then so they gave me a bunch of money, and I was I literally was in a midlife crisis, and I was okay, screw it, whatever. And I just went and traveled the world. I literally spent all this money, all this back pay I had or whatever, and just went and traveled all over the world. And then I was just running, I was just running away from things, whatever. And then anyway, so then that happened, and then I came back to the States, and I just started using drugs again. I started using drugs seriously again, and marijuana, and I was just going back and forth to California, doing drugs and just driving around all over the place and just living on VA money. And it was terrible. And then I was going to Portland, Oregon, and I got arrested. And this is probably the best thing that ever happened to me, but I got arrested. Excuse me, I got arrested, and they pulled me over, and the one police guy, dude, he put me in jail, and I went in jail for a week, and I had an awakening in jail or whatever. So then I was okay, how you doing? Anyway, so I gotta change my life or whatever. And so then I was okay, I decided I was gonna, I prayed, and I had this total reawakening or whatever, and I decided, I need to face things. And so I quit drinking, and I quit drugs, I quit marijuana. And marijuana, dude, that's a whole other topic for another episode or whatever. But dude, marijuana was, dude, it's such a terrible drug, dude. Anybody that's advocating marijuana for PTSD, would take a serious look at things, dude, because, dude, that drug is not good, dude. I mean, it seriously F's you up, dude. It really does. Anyway, so I don't want to go too much into that, but anyway, so I was using a lot of marijuana, and then so I decided to quit, and so I was living at my mother's house. Long story short, not really, but so then that's when I started on my path to like recovery, like real recovery, and like facing PTSD, and that's when the monster kind of started to you know, let itself out or whatever. So the first year I did rehab, I did this self kind of induced rehab, and just didn't do drugs and stuff, and I noticed all this weird stuff, dude, like all these weird things, like, dude, I could not cope, dude, with stress, dude, and function. I was like, dude, I was thinking, oh, this is just like from drugs or whatever, or like, you know, like, you know, with side effects or whatever, but dude, it just, anyway, so just weird stuff, dude, like freezing, like in just stress, like the smallest things stressing me out, dude, going into fight or flight, dude, all this shit, excuse me, all this stuff that, dude, I was totally suppressing all this time, and it's like, oh, okay, this is reality or whatever, and it sucks, dude, you know, I don't want to like deal with this or whatever, but I was like, you know, like I said, had faith and stuff, and so I was trying to do the right thing. And anyways, and then so, dude, I went to intensive PTSD therapy for a year, CBT, something they call it, like reframing, rethinking about the situation. Like, dude, I was so severe in PTSD and throes of PTSD, like, I think that CBT or whatever helped, but it was like I was having a gushing chest wound, you know, and that CBT was kind of more like, you know, like a Band-Aid kind of thing, like my stuff was way deeper or whatever. So, but anyways, I think the therapy helped, and I was talking about things, and it was insane. It was just crazy. All this, like my reality was just insane. And so, like, going shopping and all this stuff, it was just so stressful, and like everything was so hard to deal with stress and all this stuff. Anyway, so that was the first year it started happening. Then the second year is when it got really crazy. The second year is when it got really weird, and like I literally went mute. Like I went mute for like 2.5 years or something, but I started to like not necessarily not being able to talk, but not wanting to talk, and kind of not just wanting to draw any kind of attention to myself or whatsoever or anything, and like people's voices and everything were like really annoying and frustrating to me. I couldn't even deal with the stress of like people's voices and stuff. It was insane, but like, so I started working, and I was miraculously got a job somehow in a factory working with like this PTSD thing, and they were like, I don't even know how they, like what they thought of me, or like, dude, what's going on with this guy? But I barely talked at all to anybody or anything, and I was working in a factory and dealing with this PTSD. And the other thing was like, I had this other thing that started happening where like anybody being aggressive or anything, like just totally threw me off big time. Like anybody that showed like the slightest bit of aggression or whatever, I immediately went into like deep, serious PTSD, like fight or flight. Like I thought this person's gonna kill me kind of thing. Like that's what, to me, that's what PTSD is. Like it's just way, like just a way just a like just way blown out of proportion kind of like response to normal things, you know what I mean? Like someone would raise his voice or move a little aggressively towards me or anything, kind of normal thing, would just put me in like total fight or flight. And so I would like freeze up, and like I couldn't move for like minutes at a time, and people would be like, dude, what's wrong? Blah, 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 and get more aggressive, and I'd just be more like wigged out, and it sucked. It so sucked. And so it was so hard, so much work dealing with like just dealing with these episodes every day of like going into fight or flight all the time. And I feel like it was my brain kind of just basically kind of trying to recalibrate reality or whatever, you know. And anyway, so that went on for like a year. I was working and stuff, and so I had to move, like I had to be so careful moving around. I'd move really slow and really methodically and just like really so cautiously everywhere, and just anybody's energy or movement or anything would just totally like just would be like, for instance, like this, like that guy, this bike, this just normal thing, biking guy, like having the PTSD would be like, oh, there's something happening, or you know, whatever. I don't know. It's so weird, hard to explain. But anyways, so yeah, my mind was just like on overdrive. Talk about hyper alert, dude. It was just hyper alert, dude. Everything, any motion, movement, sound, anything was like, oh, what's that? I mean, it was the most exhausting thing I've ever dealt with in my life. But anyway, so that went on for like a year. Then the second year was worse. The second year was like I went like totally mute. And I was working at this like telecommunications company, believe it or not, like answering phones. It's kind of comical to talk about actually. But I mean, I could barely speak, and I was working on telephones, like an answering machine service. I'd just be like, hello. I could just say basic things like, hello, how are you? How much do you want? Whatever, this thing. People are like, dude, aren't you gonna like, what's wrong with you? Or whatever. I'd be like, dude, I can't even begin to just explain, dude. But anyway, so that went on for a while, for a year, and that was just like, dude, and the freezing thing got even way worse. It was so annoying and everything, and like my mom's all the time like, dude, what's going on? What's wrong with you? And all this stuff. And anyways, so yeah, and then these really weird things started happening. Like I literally was like freezing so bad, I'd freeze for longer durations of time, like a couple minutes or something. And so I couldn't move or whatever. I was scared to move. And like scared to talk and all this stuff, and like talk about like psychosomatic or whatever. But so anyways, and all this stuff is going on. I'm totally aware of it, but I like can't control it. I can't control how effing scared I am of like, you know, this guy raising his voice at me at like, you know, the gas station or whatever. Like in my mind, I'm consciously aware of like, dude, this is way irrational for me to be overreacting like this, how scared I am, this guy talking like aggressively to me or whatever. But I couldn't, there's nothing I could do about it. I was just like petrified with fear. And it was the weirdest thing. But anyways, so then I would freeze up in like the gas station and all stuff all the time. People would be like, dude, what's wrong with you? And so they would like push on me. And if anybody would like push on me or anything, it was the worst thing, because like I'd be like so scared to like move or whatever. Like if I responded in like anger or something, you know what I mean? Like fight or flight, like some guy like coming up and touching me, you know, like I wanted to like rip his arm off, you know what I mean? So I had to like be really careful and controlled or whatever. And so I had to just like let him push me over. So it would just let these people like, you know, I would freeze up and he'd get all aggressive and in my face, and then he would like push on me, and instead of like reacting or doing some kind of like move or defensive thing or like, you know, something, I would just go totally limp and passive, and I would just let him like push me over on the ground, you know, instead of me like going into, you know, military mode or something, like, you know, doing karate chop on his, you know, neck or whatever. Anyways, so I had, like, literally every day I was having, not every day, but at least a couple times a week, having the ambulance called on me because they didn't know what was going on with this person. He's totally mute, falling over in my store, whatever, and they would call the police on me. So I'd go up to the freaking VA, and go in the VA, and they'd be, oh, this guy again, like, you know, because they knew what was going on by this time. And then they'd be like, oh, you're back again or whatever, and there's nothing they could do about it either. So it was just such an annoying, the most annoying thing I've ever dealt with in my entire life. And so that went on for like a year, and I thought, man, Lord, please help me, I'm trying to do the right thing. But that dealing with that crap was like the most, like, I thought if I had to continue living on life like that, that would have been horrible, like unbearable. But anyways, so that went on for a while, and then believe it or not, it actually got worse. And it was like, you know, things get, you know, especially like PTSD get worse before they get better or whatever. But anyways, so then I started to do this like crouching thing. I'd like crouch. Oh, this guy. Hey, you alright, man? Yeah. Sorry. So anyways, like, so I would do this like crouching down thing, and this was totally military. This is like, so like the only way I could maneuver around was like in this crouch down, like military stalking position, dude. Like, you know, when you have your rifle and you're like going up on the enemy or whatever, and like stalking up on the enemy. That's the only way I could move around, dude, in this dumb thing, dude. So I was so scared and afraid, like, the only way I could move around is in this crouching position. And so it is the most like ridiculous, dumb thing, dude, in the world. Like, the most embarrassing thing. It was like the Hunchback of Notre Dame, dude, or something. Nobody knew, dude, like, what's going on with this guy, dude? And I was like walking, and it was going around everywhere like that, in the, you know, shopping or whatever. That's the only way I could get around, was in this crouching position, dude. It would have been, you know, funny if it hadn't happened to me, you know. But anyways, so that went on for a while, and it was just like, dude, I don't think, honestly, I was praying to God, like, to the Lord, dude. I didn't think I could make it through that. Anyways, just like, it was so like, I can't even begin to explain. So anyways, so that was going on. Then I ended up like moving to the homeless shelter. Another long story, sure. But anyway, so I moved to the homeless shelter, and for some reason, like, that helped my PTSD. Like, I literally went there on a prompting, like a spiritual prompting, like, I should go and face my fears, whatever. So I had faith in the Lord, and like became homeless and was living at the shelter. And it was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life. Talk about like, okay, people raising their voice or anything would like frighten me. Dude, that's all the shelter was, dude. People yelling and screaming, and there's a lot of drugs and things going on at that time. So it was like this, it was insanity. It was like, it felt like war, basically. It felt like I was going into like, you know, like a war zone. People, like, you know, I felt like in fear of my life or whatever, and all these people yelling and screaming and blah, blah. But also it was kind of comforting, because it kind of reminded me of like being in the military, in the army, and like having these, you know, barracks arrangement or whatever. So I felt some kind of like camaraderie or something with the homeless